the cycle of behavior, how is it used across a camp? I'll give you a couple examples, and it could be a jiu-jitsu camp, it could be an MMA camp, it really doesn't matter, but it's a camp, you have an event, you probably know your opponent, so I'll give you an example. You've got a fighter who's a stand-up guy, and he's good on the ground, but he's not great, he's fighting a wrestler. So throughout that camp, you've got to work on the ability for that athlete not to fixate on being taken to the ground. And to focus, though, on the training. Because if he's taken to the ground, if you lay in that athlete's mind a false piece of evidence that we have to stay off the ground, boy, are you going to disable that person, because as soon as his butt hits that ground, he is going to work right into that fear loop and not be able to get out of it, because he's going to be desperate instead of tactical. Now, desperation is useful in certain times, because but the quicker we can get from desperation to tactical, the better. So yeah, it's okay to tell that athlete, when your butt hits the mat, you can have your oh shit moment, but you got to quickly enable yourself to get tactical. So as you're going through training, we can use our ECT training, we can work on the wrestler, we can work on the leg pick, we can work on what happens here, and back it down, back it down, back it down. So you really start to mitigate the athlete's fear to being on his back if he's against the wrestler. And then obviously you train for the tactical from there. So that's where the psycho-behavioral layover an entire camp is incredibly valuable, is take a part where the athlete thinks or fears that he's less than prepared, and then work through that, explain to him that you're not in such a bad place there. Don't give this guy more credit than he's due. Let him earn that credit. And in the moment, when he's trying to earn it, you're not going to be afraid. But we're going to train you to go from the uh-oh to the tactical moment in the cycle behavior. So we use that a lot there.
That's awesome. I mean, it's you know, we were saying just, you know, on the little break where, you know, I've injected this into the tactical world, and it's very exciting for me to see it being injected into the professional fighting world, because that's where I came from as a martial artist all my life, and so it's neat living vicariously through you and your team.
Well, I stole all this stuff from you. I've directed it towards, but yeah. So look at it when you're training for a tournament as a jiu-jitsu guy or an MMA guy. Typically, fear will come if you're a half guard guy in jiu-jitsu and you're in half guard. You're never afraid. That's why you went there, right? Usually when you get afraid, you go to your favorite position, right? As long as it's your opponent's favorite counter is not your position, right? Exactly. So, but you'll find that if you can work through and identify your weaknesses, and your weaknesses usually cause you to get into the fear loop. And if you explain why are you concerned, and again, we won't use the word fear, but for a label, why are you concerned in that area, how do we work through it, and then how do I show you that it's really not that huge of a liability to have that perceived blind spot in your game. And so what we do is we take those high edges as fear loops are concerned and just mute them down over time. So you teach that athlete then to manage it intellectually when his butt hits the floor if he's not.
I think another thing is fighting for most people, you know, will always be very emotional because it's a fight. And so the ability to have the fear loop, or sort of the cycle behavior, and I love you know, the shift to concern when you're talking to the guy, because people have a negative connotation for fear, like, oh, you know, if I was skilled or prepared, I wouldn't be afraid, right? You know, what we want to do is let them think of the acronym in the same way SPEAR is an acronym, or same way BJJ, or whatever, you know, it's just a label. But you know, what I do is, people ask me, this is too technical, this is, and I go, look, you know, when you're diving over a car with your gun and shooting, you're not thinking of the cycle behavior. This is Zen, you know, samurai moment. And but what I do tell people, and I do tell coaches that listen, and not a lot do, is that the more science you bring to your camp, the less reactive and emotional your athletes will be. And so you did that with, you know, the energy systems. You did for RJ. And so when somebody, you know, has a map for the neural circuitry of fear, how we make decisions under duress, how do we in camp go, okay, let's watch the tape of the last tournament, your last fight, what was going on here, dude? You know, and oh yeah, that's where I was, you know, thinking about this or thinking about that. And then what you can do is as you said, you know, you change those combat concerns by working it, by drilling it, by going, here's your plan. If he takes you to the ground, you've got to get up, but this is what he's going to try and do. Here are your counters. And we did that with Phil in his first, you know, fight.
Canadian championship.
Yeah, so, you know, you know, it was basically, hey, do you want to fight the champ? Phil had one fight and was English, and the champ was French. It was going to be in Montreal, and Phil calls me up all excited. I got a title shot. I'm like laughing on the phone. He goes, Coach, why are you laughing? I go, Phil, how do you get a title shot after one? They're throwing you to the wolves. They want to see you get beaten up. There's a big, you know, French-English rivalry at the time, and I just said to him bluntly, I said, listen, it was cycle behavior. I said, Phil, you are an okay striker. You're a decent grappler. And the champ is better at all these, and he's got like 13 fights, and he's fought internationally. The only way you're going to beat him is to exhaust him, so your conditioning has to be through the roof, and then we've got to take away the two things he uses to finish people. We identified them through all of this. We directed our training towards that. We didn't do any sparring. I said, you're not going to, sparring for 2 months is going to help you. You need to have an exact plan, and he followed it, and you know, 7 minutes in, armbar the guy. It was awesome. Science.
Yeah, it is, and cycle of behavior, to your point, is you can't snap it, but it becomes a great blueprint to work through less than optimal parts of your game during your training camp, whether it's for the Pan Ams, the Mundials, whatever it is. You're going to have a hole in your game. The quicker you can plug that hole with these type of psychological tools as well as physical tools in harmony, the much better you are. So.